everybody. Reporting to you again from the Glamour City, Hollywood.
And it was an enormous amount of work. Working on the machine was incredibly frustrating. It was a really great machine, but it was actually, it's funny. It's considered a research and development machine. And so it's not supposed to be doing the amount of work that I was putting it to. So I kept on having all of these pieces break, and I didn't understand because I didn't know that I was overstressing this machine. And I remember I got on the phone with the guy who sold it to me, and he was like, and I was like, this thing keeps breaking. And he was amazing. Like, he was so great, always sending me new pieces, always trying to help me out. And he was like, okay, wait, how many tablets are you running on this thing? Per week? And I was just like, 20,000. And he was like, no, he's like, this is not made to do that. You're going to blow this machine out.
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for a show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. Today, I'm joined by Lindsay McCormick, who is the founder and CEO of Byte. Welcome to the show today.
Thanks for having me, Scott. Excited to chat.
All right. So I think you're a surfer. I believe you love surfing so much that you actually even became a surf instructor. Is that correct?
Yep, that's right. Before Byte, I spent 4 years in Malibu teaching little kids how to surf.
Now, it's hard enough to be a surfer. But then when you have to actually teach others, what was that like?
It was really fun. So it is hard. But especially, when it's their first time out, a lot of times it's going to be really challenging. If you've ever surfed before, it is not an easy to pick up sport, because you're dealing with your own body, but also the board and the wave, and everything is changing all the time. So it's definitely, it's complex, but when you're with the kids, you just want to have them have fun and enjoy the ocean and respect the ocean and, really be out in nature. So yeah.
I think what's distinctive is that because of the location, Malibu, is that many of these people, for them, it's not just a kind of a short-term blip in terms of interest, but it's a lifestyle to some extent. So when somebody has a kind of a mindset of a lifestyle, their willingness to experiment and then keep getting back on, even if they fall, is different, would you say?
Yeah, absolutely. There's definitely a different type of determination as opposed to if you just went and tried to do it on vacation where you're like, well, I'll probably never do this again. It's a totally different thing when the ocean's in your backyard.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you went from that to getting into the TV production business, and that also helped you to not only do the programming and behind the scene aspect, but that also forced you to travel as well. And I wonder how that experience all kind of culminated into this opportunity around waste.
Yeah. So it was something that I noticed when I was out in the water every day in Malibu. Kind of more and more plastic was washing up on my board. It kind of became like a game with the kids of how many little pieces of plastic could we stick in our wetsuits, to bring back to the ocean, back to the beach to throw it out while we were out there. So I was starting to see kind of this big change just between the few years that I was out there. So I was very aware of the plastic problem and kind of how it was beginning to build up on our beaches and in oceans. And so I decided when I was trying to figure out, what I wanted to do with my life full time, forever and ever, I was like, well, I would love to be able to make nature documentaries and conservation documentaries. And so that was kind of the beginning of why I wanted to work in TV. So I was working in unscripted, which is the most similar in to TV to documentaries, where you're learning the same skill set, where you're telling a story that's true and just trying to make sure it's entertaining, but also factual, and kind of piecing these shows together. And so that's kind of what I was doing before Byte. I was building up my toolkit in what I was hoping to be eventually a documentary producer. And I think, it was when I was traveling all the time. So when I was working on the show House Hunters. And so when you're filming, you're only in a destination for a few days. So it was always carry on only, because if they lose your luggage, you're out, and I was going through those little toothpaste tubes, and I was able to refill my conditioner, my shampoo. I'd already been living this like a lower waist lifestyle, but I felt like every time I got back from a shoot, I was throwing out a little tube. And I started looking into, what were the alternatives for me at the time to bring on shoots, right? Like, was there a powder or was there a tablet or, what could I use instead? And that was the beginning of understanding the, severe impact of toothpaste tubes on our environment. So over 1 billion toothpaste tubes are thrown out every single year, which is the mass of the Empire State Building every year, 50 times. So it's a gigantic amount of plastic that's ending up in oceans and landfills. Because the way toothpaste tubes are constructed, it's a mixed material. It can't be recycled. And so I was like, okay, I want to solve this. And that was the beginning of Bite, trying to literally just solve that problem for myself. And then also figuring out all of the harsh chemicals and everything that's in toothpaste as well, which I had not even thought about until then.
Well, I certainly have traveled very extensively internationally as well as domestic. So I definitely understand the problem that you're painting. And I'm convinced that those little small compact size toothpaste is not the same formula as a larger size. For some reason, they're not as effective. So I always find that it's better to take the regular size, but just, get to a point where it's smaller and then save that and put that aside for travel purposes. But it really is an issue. And of course, after you use it, it's clearly not recyclable. Because of mixed use and the fact that there's still stuff inside. So what is Bite and what's Bite trying to do with this category?
Right. So Bite, we make dried toothpaste tablets. They come in a glass jar with a compostable refill pouch. So it's kind of like a Smartie where you pop it in your mouth, you bite down, and it will turn to powder after you bite down a few times. And then you brush with a wet toothbrush. And once you get to that part, it's going to behave just like regular toothpaste. It's minty, it's foamy, it's fresh, it cleans your teeth. And that's basically what we've done is we've taken out the water, we've taken out the glycerin. And because of that, we've been able to take out the harsh chemicals, preservatives, artificial flavors, all this other gunk SLS that's in most commercial toothpaste, and just have a way more, a cleaner formula that's made in a sustainable way. And so we started with toothpaste tablets back in 2018, and we've since expanded. We now have an entirely plastic-free oral care line. We were the first to ever make plastic-free whitening gel, plastic-free. We have some plastic-free mouthwash tablets, a bamboo toothbrush, and we started making deodorant as well. We made the first ever refillable deodorant with compostable refills.
So you make a really interesting point is that for some listeners, depending on, I guess, how old they are, is that toothpaste wasn't always in a paste form. And certainly for older generation, maybe those that are centennial or a little bit younger, maybe they remember that, they would actually buy powder form and certainly use that. And I know like many countries, for example, use it in powder form or even just use salt if that's all they have, for instance. So it's not revolutionary. It's just in some ways you're actually kind of regressing to where things have been. You talk about the fact that you're trying to take the glycerin out of the picture, and you talked about putting into this concentrated pill form without the chemicals and preservative. But that process wasn't necessarily easy, right? Because I think you even purchased a tabulating machine. So tell us about the R&D at home or in your warehouse, that process to get to the final form.
Yeah. So I started Bite in my living room, and I didn't have a dentistry or chemistry degree or experience at all. So what I did is I talked to every dentist and dental hygienist who'd give me the time of day to figure out what toothpaste is. Why are we using it? What's in it that's good? What do we not need? What do we need? And then starting to go through all these different types of toothpaste formulas, finding out, okay, so essentially toothpaste is an abrasive, a flavoring agent, a foaming agent, which foaming agent actually is not incredibly necessary, but people want it. So you need to have it there for marketing, for, use reasons. And then, you have your actives, right? Which could be fluoride or nanohydroxyapatite or whatever is in there that actually helps your teeth besides just scrubbing. And then, so it was figuring out, how do I do this? And then how do I do it in tablet form? And so I also took some open source online chemistry classes to kind of understand the background of how things are going to mix together and how they'll interact with our mouths. And I actually then took tableting classes because tableting is actually, it's a science. So there's pressure, there's different ingredients, and they're going to behave different ways, especially under stress, especially when they're mixed for different amount of times. And so it was then figuring out, okay, so I have this idea and I have all of these different types of ingredients. How am I going to make sure that it compresses into a tablet that's going to be hard enough to survive shipment, but then break up easy enough in someone's mouth when they're ready to use it. And so it was kind of going back and forth and figuring that out. I ended up buying a tableting machine and just really experimenting in my living room until I got it right.
And just to, give some metaphors. My wife, for example, at some point, I think maybe 5-10 years ago, she was doing her own essential oils and other kind of chemical-free makeup, line. And it was interesting to watch because, to your point, she had to self-teach herself to become a chemist in a way and to learn all these scientific properties of these aspects. And for you, it's clearly the chemical aspects, the properties, but certainly even the design aspects and the manufacturing process. So it's a big learning experience. And I wonder, in that process, what was most frustrating and what were the things that you felt like, gosh, if I could just get through this hurdle, I'm much closer to that final form?
That's a great question. There were so many hurdles, especially at the beginning. And so I'm sure your wife can attest, where you think that you're trying to go from point A to point B, but what you don't understand is there's about like 57 other steps in between that you have to do, where you're just like, I want to learn how to do this, but then you realize that you have to learn like X, Y, Z before you can even begin to understand the basis of that. So I think, everything from learning how to set up a website to taking the photos on my iPhone to, it's like every little piece of this puzzle had to come together. And it was an enormous amount of work. Working on the machine was incredibly frustrating. It was a really great machine, but it was actually, it's funny. It's considered a research and development machine. And so it's not supposed to be doing the amount of work that I was putting it to. So I kept on having all of these pieces break, and I didn't understand because I didn't know that I was overstressing this machine. And I remember I got on the phone with the guy who sold it to me, and he was like, and I was like, this thing keeps breaking. And he was amazing. Like, he was so great, always sending me new pieces, always trying to help me out. And he was like, okay, wait, how many tablets are you running on this thing? Per week? And I was just like, 20,000. And he was like, no, he's like, this is not made to do that. You're going to blow this machine out. And so that was kind of the beginning of being like, all right, as my little business was growing, understanding the limitations of, if I'm constantly dealing with this machine breaking and I'm spending all my time, actually making these tablets, I'm not spending it on marketing. I'm not spending it on networking. I'm not spending it on anything else. So I think the first thing that I realized I had to get off my plate, which was one of the harder things to get off, was actually the manufacturing of the tablets.
And that's really where fulfillment and companies come in, contract manufacturers and so forth, whether it's domestic or overseas. And of course, I'm sure you've had to go through a number of those to figure out which was going to actually come up with the right formulary and the quality that you were looking for. And then, of course, the challenge there is going to be scale, so production costs. So the per unit is only going to go down if you run enough larger quantities, but then how do you get to large quantities to justify it if you don't want to hold on to a bunch of inventory? So tell us about, how did you get the word out and get to a point of critical mass so that you can sell enough quantities to justify these production runs?
Yeah, it's great. So we had gotten really lucky that there was just an incredible amount of word of mouth. So at this point, back in 2018, the zero waste movement was newer. It was still very, very niche, and there was no one making toothpaste tablets the way that I was making them. Right? There was no. So it was, instead of, especially at the beginning, I wasn't even getting the word out. People were finding me, and they were writing about Bite in their blogs. They were writing about Bite on their Instagram posts. And so it became incredibly organic. And that was kind of the beginning of pushing the messaging out there. And then once people had tried it and they realized that, it was way more convenient than powder. It tasted way better than, any other thing that was on the market. Then it kind of became the de facto for that community. And then it kind of got, it was a small community, but a very loud voice. And that was kind of the beginning of that. And so we ended up having a Facebook video actually go viral back in 2018 that really launched everything. And that Facebook video was, a result of these smaller communities talking about it. And then once that happened, I had gone from $6,000 in total sales to $200,000 in sales in the first few hours that the video was up. So that was kind of okay, I definitely need a manufacturer now. I need business insurance. So that was kind of the beginning of Bite and the trajectory.
So I love that story. And of course, as you go from early adopters to early majority, there's going to be a bit of a chasm, right? So for the early majority, maybe even kind of, the stage after that, they're probably thinking that while it's interesting, I think the biggest hurdle is going to be change in behavior, habit change. So how do you overcome some of those aspects where their perception is, I'm so used to a paste form, whether I like it or not, that's just what I grew up with. Now, what if I accidentally swallow the pill? So how did you message and how do you demonstrate the how-to in such a way that people feel like, maybe the adoption to the, from paste to pill is not so high?
Yeah. So one of my favorite reviews that we get is, it was weird at first, but now I'm obsessed. Or, it was confusing. It was hard to get used to at first, but now I can never go back to paste. And I think that it's one of the things that we really spend a lot of time educating our customers, understanding like this is a habit that you've been doing twice a day, every day since you were 3 years old. So like you probably are going to eat the tablet the first time you use it, and you probably are going to be like, wait, this feels like super weird, your first time, but give it a week, keep trying it, at least give it 3 times, because then, we hear time and time again, someone will be like, I've been using Bite. I didn't, I knew that I liked it, but I was just using it now out of habit. And then I forgot my toothpaste and I used my friend's, regular toothpaste on vacation or I forgot my bits and I used my friend's regular toothpaste and like, it was so gross, like it felt like, thick and I didn't like the taste. And so I think once people understand and they get used to the form factor, they typically don't want to go back. Like we have high stickiness. It all of that really shows. And I think, it is understanding like it's a weird product and we're asking you to change behaviors, which is like, marketing 101 is like, don't ask people to change behaviors. And like, that's exactly what we've done. But I think it helps because it's novel and people are curious. And I also think that, there's a big difference between our first customers and what Bite was then and what it is now. So, the first customers were definitely, they, were incredibly eco-friendly. They would make compromises on, their products. And they were very, very forgiving of, if it didn't taste right, if it felt, if it was a little soapy, they were forgiving. And we were able to kind of grow up as we expanded our customer base to where we were able to fix those problems where it was like, okay, yeah, it's not as minty, we need to make it mintier. And so as like our tablets, if you tasted them back in 2018 and you taste them now, they're so much better now. They taste like regular toothpaste now. And it took some time to get there, figuring out how to do it. We do everything ourselves. So, but we were able to kind of level up with the expansion of our customer base, which I think was really important.
So let's talk about the competitive landscape. Is that the traditional toothpaste manufacturers, which are really large, almost like pharmaceutical companies, and I can't mention their names, but they have invested significant capital into factory capacity, automation, and so forth. So for them to change the form factor, it's going to be very difficult. But at the same time, because of this kind of crushing pressure on ESG and sustainability, more and more of the CPGs or the consumer fast-moving products are going to have to adopt. And some of them at some point are going to say, you know what, why don't we consider this form factor? So what is the defensibility? What is your protection from some of the larger guys coming in and saying, that's a nice niche market, but it's getting to a point where it's big enough where it makes sense for us to consider that?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think there's a few things kind of going on. One, I think that they have already started releasing toothpaste tablets, the big guys in competition with us. But I think there's a few things that they'll be up against. And like one is going to be trust, right? So especially when you're looking at mission-driven consumer base, they're looking to be able to identify with the company, understand that they are, working for benefit of the planet. And then there's also, which is very real, they can't get too strong on their messaging, because if they do, then it's kind of proving that every other line that they have is a problem. And so, I'm really curious to see kind of as they level up and as they start trying to advertise the product that they have, like how can they be, anti-plastic, or how can they be, toothpaste tubes are a problem for the environment while still the majority of their business is toothpaste tubes. So I think that they're going to be kind of caught between a rock and a hard place as they continue to kind of go. And I also think that like innately, you see it time and time again when you have the smaller brands, that come out with a whether it's a cleaner formula or a different form factor, and you have the big guys try to rip them off and cut them out, and it just doesn't really stick. It's not received as well to the client, to the customers that they're hoping to. So I think, ultimately my goal and my hope as a founder of a sustainable company is that everyone gets on board, right? Like we can't do it alone. Like Bite as a toothpaste tablet company can't eliminate toothpaste tubes out of the world, but the big guys can, right? So I think it's them kind of understanding, like how will they do it differently? Maybe they're going to have to go for price, or maybe they're going to have to go a different way. But I do think, less toothpaste tubes in the ecosystem is a good thing. But I think it's going to be really interesting to see what they do as they continue to go this path.
And clearly from a marketing and branding, you guys have done a very good job. And again, it speaks to your background, like we were talking about before, even the way you present yourself as a former person who used to produce, but understand the transference of enthusiasm on camera, how important that is. But as you get from early adopters to early majority to eventually late majority, there's going to be skeptics and people that's going to be questioning everything. So what would you say to those that comment, this is just simply toothpaste in pill form in a glass jar? Is that really going to make a big difference in the scheme of things for net zero? Or people who say, well, this is really more of a, novel marketing ploy than true innovation. How do you respond to these types of questions that's going to come up?
Yeah, I think skepticism is incredibly important. I think that everybody should be looking through any business that's doing something sustainable with that type of lens, because I think there is a lot of greenwashing that happens. And I think that the questioning is necessary. And I do it myself. So I think it's great. What I think makes it about for us is, one of the core values that we have as a company is that every little bit counts, which is really true. And so when it comes to, it's not just you're switching out your toothpaste tube. We've heard time and time again from customers because they've wanted to be more eco-friendly. They wanted to live a more low waste lifestyle, but they've been totally intimidated by it. And then we were able to offer a solution that was, convenient. It, tasted good. It felt cool, right? Their friends were using it. They liked identifying with the brand. They liked what we stand for. And then that was the beginning of being like, maybe being zero waste is not so hard, right? They fold that into the routine and then they look at what else I can change. And so whether it's cleaning out their home cleaning supplies or, or changing up their home cleaning supplies, or maybe using a facial bar cleanser as opposed to a gel cleanser, it's kind of like that baby step into a zero waste or a lower waste lifestyle for a lot of customers. And I think also when it comes down to, the idea of kind of it just being marketing, it's a different form factor, and it really does eliminate the amount of plastic that's going into there. So I think, between the fact that it is like a glass jar and it's refillable and it's compostable and that there is no trace by the end of it. And we've worked really hard as a brand, not only what you can see as a customer, but also behind the scenes when it comes to our supply chain kind of up and down. What can we make more eco-friendly, and how can we push our partners and vendors to be more eco-friendly, like on their back end too. I think that there's a lot of power as a small but mission-driven brand to actually have change and create change throughout that. So but I think skepticism is good. It's a good thing.
And thank you for that. I appreciate it. Now, in terms of distribution, and certainly, of course, the e-commerce is going to be very important, and social selling aspects as well. But in terms of traditional placement and distribution, when we think about large big box stores, those stores have a section that's specifically dedicated to travel accessories. And these are the tiny toothpaste, these are the tiny deodorants. And if you really study it, it's really the worst examples of what we're doing in terms of plastic and single use. I wonder, how do you as a category potentially dominate that so your products replace a lot of these plastic prone single-use throwaway things, as well as to also dominate the airport space, where in an airport where people are having to renew or get some fresh supplies, you're right there where people need it.
I think that's what's really exciting. I think that what's unfortunate is that there's so much there's so much more that we need to do. But what's exciting is that there's all that opportunity. And so for me, it's how do we get, Bite toothpaste tablets in airports, in people's hands when they need them the most. And so whether it's like a pouch or a packet, how do we do that? And I think, when you look at something like our deodorant, it's actually the size of a travel deodorant. I actually have it right here. And it seems really small. Like it's a little bigger than like a Zippo lighter, but it actually has almost the same amount of formula as one of those big deodorants that you would see on the shelf of a big box store. But what we did is that's in a plastic container. It has like a big screw, like in the middle and like an elevator. We took that all out. None of it's there. So it's literally just the formula. So you end up with way smaller, more travel friendly items that, are just like higher quality that you can then just refill over and over again. I think that the challenge that we have is because they're small, people expect it to be cheap, but we're like, but it's the same amount of formula as one of the big things that you would, pay X amount for, as opposed to a smaller, travel size one that actually is half plastic. Right. And so I think like those are the types of things, those are the challenges that we look up as a brand, of how do we communicate this properly and how do we make sure that people understand the difference.
Well, I can tell you as a personal testimony is that, every time I have to throw away a used deodorant, and of course it's mostly plastic packaging, or I have to throw away my toothpaste because you got the paper box, and then of course you got the tube itself, it makes me cringe. And knowing that in the US certainly, and many EU countries as well, we don't have the right recycling facilities. So for the most part, even though we put it into a recycling bin, it just goes through landfills. That's the truth. So it makes me cringe. And I personally want to say that I think what you guys are doing is the right thing. And that's the right approach. And I don't foresee the big incumbent players necessarily switching over anytime soon. They rather spend their millions of dollars in ads and marketing for greenwashing than actually do something about their factory floors because it costs too much money. Any final comments?
No, just thank you very much for having this. Was a really interesting conversation. And the idea kind of for anybody listening, we kind of touched on it before, but every little thing that you do really does make a difference and add up. And I know that we're both in the eco-friendly space, and sometimes it can feel very overwhelming and like nothing that we do matters, but voting matters, our daily habits matters. And I'm excited for the future with all the new innovation coming out. So
I have been joined by Lindsay McCormick, founder and CEO of Bite. Thank you for joining today.
Thank you.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.